As we begin Chapter 14, Immigration and Urbanization, we want to recognize that while we're discussing immigration from more than 100 years ago, it really does have a direct impact on society today. Immigration has become one of the major topics of conversation in our political realm. As we go through, we want to compare new immigrants to the earlier immigrants of the United States. We want to explain push and pull factors leading immigrants to come to America. We want to describe the challenges that immigrants faced in traveling to America. And we want to analyze how immigrants adapted to American life while trying to maintain familiar cultural practices. Prior to the 1870s, immigrants were primarily Protestant. They came from Northern and Western Europe. They came in family groups, oftentimes having friends in the United States. Many of these so-called old immigrants, because they came before the 1870s, were educated or had a skill or a trade. Things changed in the 1870s. Immigrants that came after that point were mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe. They were unskilled and poor. Very few of them could read in their own language, let alone read or speak English. Many of them were Catholic or Jewish, and this is going to pose problems as they try to assimilate into American culture. Many of them settled in cities because they were looking for jobs, and that's where the jobs were available. What is it about leaving your home? What makes an individual decide that the best thing to do is to leave the place that they've always known and go to somewhere new? These are known as push factors, factors which compel people to leave their homes and to find a new place to live. Things such as famine, war, persecution. What was going on throughout the world in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, which prompted hundreds of thousands of individuals to leave their homes and come to the United States? Of course, there was the potato famine in Ireland. There were war throughout Europe. There were religious persecutions in Russia. All of these factors will influence why immigrants would decide to leave the homes that they'd always known and come to the United States. On the flip side are the pull factors. Those are the factors which draw people to a new place, what it is that is attractive about that particular location and pulls the individual to come there. Economic opportunity, religious freedom, a promise of a better life. Within the United States, there's always been that attitude of the American dream, that the streets were paved with gold. All of that was very attractive to these individuals that were facing such hardships. Religious and political freedom. If you were living in a time and a place where persecution would happen at any particular moment just simply because of what you believed or what you thought, it would be very opportunistic to find a place that was safe. Many immigrants coming in the late 1870s and 1880s would be considered chain immigrants because they would be joining family or friends who had already settled in America. These earlier immigrants would help the new immigrants to find homes, to find jobs, to learn to speak the language, and to better assimilate into the United States. Immigrants traveling from Europe would enter into the United States through Ellis Island beginning after 1892. This was a processing station for immigrants. This is where officials would decide who could and could not stay in the United States. Immigrants would have to be healthy. They would have to show that they had money or a particular skill, or that they had a sponsor, someone who was going to provide support for them in the United States as they worked to find a place to live and a job. Anyone who was considered to be unhealthy would not be allowed entry into the United States. Often this is when we saw families that would be broken apart and separated, because if a child was deemed to be unhealthy, one parent would have to return to the homeland to stay with that child. It's also when we saw a lot of family names be changed or shortened. If you remember the movie American Tail, when the Mouskowitz family comes from Russia because of the persecution that they faced there, once they got to Ellis Island, their name was shortened to Mouse because the officials couldn't spell Mouskowitz. For immigrants entering on the West Coast in California, the receiving station was known as Angel Island. This was where immigrants from China and other Asian nations would go through the receiving process similar to that of Ellis Island. This opened in 1910. Unfortunately, many immigrants might have been held for weeks or months. At this particular time, there was a strong feeling of anti-Asian sentiment in the United States. Immigrants were not welcome from these cultures and these societies because they were so different from that of the United States. Very few of these individuals would speak any English. They weren't coming to stay in the United States permanently. In many instances, it was just simply a matter of coming and finding a job, earning enough money to go back and support the family at home. Immigrants entering the United States in the late 1800s, early 1900s faced a large number of difficulties. Assimilation was very necessary in order for these immigrants to be successful. This was the process by which immigrants found homes, found jobs, learned the new language and the new customs. Most immigrants entering in the United States during this time period stayed in the cities because there were jobs, and they lived in ethnic neighborhoods that were known as ghettos. Many Americans believed that once these immigrants entered into the United States, they should do everything possible to become Americanized. Immigrants should assimilate. This would therefore make them very loyal citizens, that they would give up their culture and their attitudes from their previous homeland and adopt attitudes and culture and beliefs of the United States. This is also where we get the attitude and the idea of the melting pot. That American society has developed in such a way that white people of all different nationalities have blended together to create a single culture. Throughout this time period, we see a large increase in the attitude of nativism, belief that native-born white Americans are superior to the immigrant newcomers. This is going to be based on the competition for jobs and the housing. This is going to fuel resentment. People believe that if you weren't a Native American, native-born white American, not meaning Native American Indians, that you weren't as good as those native-born Americans. Also, we'll see the differences that religion will present. Most Americans at this point were Protestant. They don't understand the religions of the Catholic or the Jewish faith, and we often fear the things that we do not understand. So these attitudes toward immigrants that are different will make things more difficult. For immigrants, most will stay in the cities. That's where the jobs are. And we will see an influx of immigrants in industrial jobs and factories. They will live in those ethnic ghetto neighborhoods. This is where you see the development of Chinatown and Little Italy in places like New York and San Francisco, where groups of immigrants from the same area, from the same country, from the same region, will live together and provide a support system for one another. There will be organizations that will provide help, many religious organizations. This is when we'll see the development of the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association. Also will be the Young Men's Hebrew Association for Jewish immigrants. In most instances, children will adapt more quickly and more readily than adults. primarily because they go to school and because it's easier for them to learn a new language. So children typically assimilated much more quickly and easily than did adults.